Hi, everyone. My name is Sherston Pugh, and I'm an Associate Director of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program in Columbia University's School of Professional Studies. Welcome to our December NECR Alumni Career Deep Dive. Each month, we host an NECR alumni who will spend part of this hour breaking down their career trajectory to help us better understand the many different paths that a career in conflict resolution can go down. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Clarence Coaxum, who graduated from the program in 2011. Following Clarence's presentation, there will be plenty of time for Q&A, so please don't hesitate to use the QA box at the bottom of your screen to share your questions with us. So without further ado, I will welcome Clarence and I'll let you briefly introduce yourself. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sherston. So as Sherston said, my name is Clarence Coaxum. I'm currently the Associate Director of Finance and Administration at the SOF Heyman, which is here at Columbia University. And I'm thrilled to be here. Having graduated the program in 2011, I still like to keep touch and find out things that are going on because ultimately what you learn in the program doesn't stop when you leave. You just keep going back, and I think that's how you continue to stay relevant and you continue to stay fresh. And so I'm glad to be able to share some insights that I have having gone through the program.
Great, and we're so happy to have you here. So let's rewind, I guess, a little bit. And can you tell us more about what led you to the NECR program and how did you find it?
Yeah, it's so way back in 2010, I was working for Columbia College in the office of the Center for the Core Curriculum. And it's essentially an office that sort of every undergraduate comes through at some point, and you can just imagine the volume of students. And with the high volume of students, it's easy to get students who have, various issues that they're coming to you to help reconcile. And while I think that I had, I thought at least that I had some, a pretty hefty toolbox to sort of address some of those things, I was looking for something else. And so, being here on the Morningside campus, it's a very vibrant, community academically. And so I started looking around at these programs and I came across the NECR program and I was like, I don't really know what that is, but it has conflict in it, right? And so, let me just go ahead and see if I should, learn more about it. So I applied to the program and I really, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. That's just to put it mildly. And I say that truthfully, but I think that having, made the decision to enroll in the program was one of the best decisions I've made because it allowed me to actually just do some self-introspection and learn so much about myself, which in turn made me a better employee and made me sort of more well-rounded. But one of the things that I started to do after I had, had been accepted and I was trying to determine whether I would defer, is I started making some excuses, right? And so that's one of the things that really stood out for me. It was like this whole list of like, if I enroll in this program, it's going to impact my personal life because this is a rigorously academic program. I'm not going to have this free time to do things as I want to do. And when I looked at it, it was like this massive list of excuses of all the reasons why I shouldn't enroll in the program versus why I should. And that made it easy for me when I started to look at it as an opportunity. And again, I'd be disingenuous if I said I knew exactly where it would have led me to where I am today, because I didn't. But I'm so glad that I looked at it instead as an opportunity for me to actually grow intellectually, because there was this real curiosity about it once I actually knew what the program was about. And ultimately, it really helped me shape what I wanted to do as a result of the program.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that that is probably a very common occurrence that people have as far as like, what are the reasons I should not do something? And I'm so happy you were able to, flip that on its head a bit and see the opportunity for growth. I think that's such a, especially with going to graduate school, a common um, process that people go through. But can you tell us more? Were there any skills or concepts you learned during the program that have helped you professionally? And can you give us an example of one or two?
Sure. There's so many of them. I think that the two that always rise to the top for me um, is active listening and communication. And I think that with both of these, like so with one of the classes, and I can without mentioning too much about it, it's just a mediation class, and I had the pleasure of having two fabulous instructors for my courses, intro and advanced. And sure, we all know how to listen, right? But am I listening to you if I'm scrolling through my phone at the same time? Am I looking for the way your eyes are actually focused on me or focused away from me? Am I looking at the body language? And so, when I started really sort of trying to sort of decompose what active listening meant and how you actually do it, I found that I became so much more effective in actually having conversations with people. And so if it were a difficult conversation, the conversation may not seem difficult if someone is distracted. That is me, right? So if I'm distracted and I have someone who's talking to me and I'm not looking at all the other things that I should be looking at, I'm just listening for words. I'm not making eye contact. I'm actually quite distracted. I'm not looking at, body gestures. Or maybe repeating back what they said to me, paraphrasing. That actually doesn't really help me in the long run. But once I started to actually realize that these are all things that I should be doing actually when I'm talking to students or again in my personal life, because I can't, it's difficult to sort of expound on how much I really learned about myself after having gone through this course and getting some of these things that, I hold up just on a very high sort of pedestal, because it really does inform what I do and how I do it and interact with people. And I think it's made me a lot more effective overall. Um, the next one I would say is self-awareness. And I think that for this one, this was a tough one. And I think that it tends to be tough because I think this picture right here sort of tells a story. What do we see ourselves as versus what we are, right? And um, how do we take an honest look at ourselves to actually say, here's what I am versus here's what I want to be. And, if unless you're giving that sort of honest look at it, it's very difficult to actually take the necessary steps to actually, be what you want to be. So how does that kitten become that lion? What characteristics must it embody in order to actually become that? Um, that's just huge for me. And then I think as I mentioned at the outset, there were two. Self-awareness is on a more larger scale, but communication, and it's communication, communication, communication. I look at that in my current role, and I'll talk about my career trajectory in a moment, but um, in my final semester before I had to undertake my capstone, I took a Peacebuilding class, and it was one of the best classes because it sort of really helped me think about what I wanted to do in the future. But one of the books that our instructor assigned was On Dialogue by David Bohm. And this book, the first chapter talks about communication, right? And it's like, we think about how we communicate. We have these various mediums to do it. And it's certainly in our current climate. I mean, sure, we're doing a lot of video, but we also do a lot of email. We do a lot of texting. We see visual from short videos or television, radio, whatever it is. So there are dozens of ways in which we communicate, and it's how we do it and how we actually get that message and interpret what is actually being said, which is very important. Um, so I think that when when we set up a good sort of system in which we can actually have this communication, um, it allows for things to be brought to the surface, right? And so, let's say for instance, I'm in a position, in a management position, and I have employees who might not feel so comfortable talking to me about things that are happening within the office. And so not doing that might help them, and it's not bringing up some conflict, right? They're biting their tongue. But what you're essentially doing is like, kicking that proverbial can down the road. And so for me, it's one of these things is I go back to the book, and how do you set up a situation or a culture where people feel free to actually have this level of open communication, where things can be brought to the surface. And I think that that's just one of those really, really important things to sort of highlight.
Absolutely. And my follow-up question, you've already touched upon some of this already, but what conflict resolution skills do you frequently use that you learned in the program, and how?
Okay, so I think that I'm going to go back to the communication example. Um, I have, with every new hire that we have at the SOF Heyman here, I make it clear that I have an open door policy, right? And so, my door's open unless it's closed, right? So if it's closed, you probably shouldn't come in. But for the most part, it's open because I want people to be able to pop in and speak with me about things that are going on. And so part of that is by design, it's to sort of foster or help to foster an environment where people know they have the ability to be heard, right? And so it's, if you're, perhaps if you're having, or you find yourself in a situation where you may not necessarily have the tools to address it, you can come into my office. I don't have all the answers, but I want to actually, figure out a way where you can be heard, right? And so it's how do we think about the best way to actually make sure that you can actually get what you have off your chest, right? You don't want to just hold it in, because we know that that ends up, oftentimes that ends up being sort of worse down the road. And I think the second thing is it's like having some sort of evaluative process, and that goes back to the self-awareness, which I'm really keen on. It's like wanting people. So at the end of the year, we here at Columbia have a process where people are required to sort of talk about, how they've performed, and, what your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And a good portion of that goes back to your self-awareness. Can you be honest with yourself about what your shortcomings are, so that we can find, or, where your deficits or gaps, so that we can find ways to actually help, fill in those gaps, right? To get you to be stronger. How do you become that lion in the mirror, right? And I think that that's really, um, it's a really important thing, but it's sort of, again, goes to helping people empower themselves, right? And it's by giving them the tools to actually grow and become greater. And, that's just one of those important things that I think that we should do more of, right? Because it actually, as I say to anyone who works with us, it's like, if you find that you need help somewhere, tell us where you need help, and we'll provide that, because ultimately it's a win-win for us all, right?
That's great and so true. Thank you for sharing that. And just going back to the program a little bit more, can you tell us what your capstone topic was? And did any of the work that you did on your capstone support your career? And real quick, for people who might not be familiar, all NECR students have to complete like capstone thesis, paper, and presentation as part of a graduation requirement from the program. But it is also a great journey. So we'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So my capstone project, I'm a glutton for punishment in some ways, in that I like to look at, bureaucracy. And so what I essentially did for my capstone was I looked at two very bureaucratic organizations, the TSA and the United States Postal Service, USPS. And what I sought to do there was to look at the conflict management systems that those two organizations put in place, um, due to the sheer volume of people that they service. And so I think if we can stop for a moment and think about our friendly TSA agent, who is greeting us before we get through security, after we're trying to board our plane. Um, and you think about, they have a job to do, and we, the consumers, we just want to get through. We want to get to our plane. We want to do what we have to do. And so you have your very tough TSA agent who's talking to you, and you just want to, this is a process here. Just look at my bag and let me go through. You think about the tensions that they go through and the tensions that they deal with. And that's something that for me was like, so how does that organization deal with the stresses that these people deal with on a daily basis? Because you think about the volume of travelers. And then on the other hand, it was the post office, which, I think of, again, it was visual in my mind, the going postal, right? So what makes someone go postal, right? What within that organization is that organization doing to help those employees when they have these stressors, not just with customers, but within themselves, right? And I think that was one of those things that was really important for me. And so it ultimately is looking at these very different yet somewhat similar systems of what they were doing to actually sort of get honest feedback from the employees, right? And to sort of with the idea of making it better. But of course, I think, evaluative process will be looked at like with a raised eye, because you have this massive amount of data, and what's being done with that data, right? Are you using it to actually manipulate, or are you actually using it to actually enhance and make things better? So it was a really good experience for me to actually delve in that level of bureaucracy. But once my capstone was done, I breathed a sigh of relief and said, I never want to do this particular kind of work again, but I was mistaken.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, it's so good to take the time to really, wrestle with um, concepts, ideas, figure out what you want to do, what you don't, and then sometimes that also changes over time. How did the program impact the way you looked at your career? Did anything change after you graduated?
Um, yes, I have to say, I think it happened before I graduated, actually. Because going back to sort of things that are sort of rise to the surface of what I take from the program, I felt like I was able to put a lot of the tools to use at that time. And once I finished the program, it's like I had everything at my disposal. Now I have this complete toolbox, and what do I want to do with it? Well, I knew it was an overflowing toolbox, but I knew it still had room for more, if that makes sense. And so the going through the program, and in fact, the second semester automatically let me know that I wanted to pursue this at a doctoral level. It was that, for me, it was that sort of revelatory. It was that sort of mind changing. I saw the impact, and I knew that I now had, sat through all of these classes and acquired these skills, these concepts, these ways of operating. And I knew that now I had some of these things, but I thought that I could probably be effective if I were that person who was standing in front of the class. And so I knew I had more to learn. And that sort of, again, led me to the path of enrolling in a doctoral program in conflict resolution studies.
And you've gone into this a little bit, but can you tell us even more about your career following the program, as well as your doctoral pursuits?
Sure. So like after 2011 was this moment of accomplishment, and it's like if you sort of draw an analogy, you you learn the skill. It's like now I want to use it, right? And for me, it's like I had this inflated sense of like what could I do for the world, right? Because I have these skills, and it was it took me going back to why, or one of the things that helped me sort of decide on joining the program, um, and looking at what I could do from an organizational standpoint, because that's where my passion was greatest. And while I was on this bubble thinking about what I wanted to do, I was actually recruited for a position here at the SOF Heyman, and I was recruited based on the knowledge that I had these skills, and that made me even more pleased, right? Because it's like, it's one thing to put yourself out there, right? But it's something very different for someone to approach you that because they say, I think you're a good fit for us based on this skill set that you have. And so for me, that was quite, flattering, and I was honored, and I'm like, of course I'm going to do it, right? But there were certain things that allowed me to do it. I knew that I was coming to work for someone who valued ideas, and I had a lot of them. I had, ideas of things that I wanted to change before, actually looking at things. It's like, I know that this is going to work, so I want to come in with these ideas. But I knew that I was coming to an environment that was supportive, and that if things weren't working, they would be open to change. These were sort of like, I'm pulling out these negotiating tactics that I didn't know that I had, but now I have them because I've graduated this program, right? And so knowing that I was going to be in a position that I was now having this HR role as well, I would be responsible for having difficult conversations. That checked off a box of what I knew that I now had some level of competency in, so that I could do that. I would be able to problem solve when no solution was immediately apparent. That to me is also appealing because it actually allows for like input from the greater collective. And for me, I think that's one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later. It's just that that's one of these things. It's like inclusion. It's very important for me. And knowing that I was now going to be in a position where these things would be sort of like in use on a daily basis or a monthly basis, that was appealing to me. So I think that it was like, for me, like looking at like, while I was at this point now enrolled in the PhD program, but I knew that I had this ability to continue to grow professionally, that was just appealing because, it was like sort of this tacit way of being able to put all of this together from the program, and take it with me and actually unfold this big box and say, okay, well, what skill do I need to use today in order to, sort of help my environment be a little bit better. So I think that that's just one of the things, and just again, the positive changes in my life, because I think that it's very difficult for me, or I would like to think anyone, to not acquire these skills and become better and then not have it bleed into one's professional life. Like, to me, that's just sort of like a natural occurrence. And so it was something that I welcomed, and it was just one of those things that I felt like fell into place in a sort of very nice and organic kind of way.
Great. And what advice do you have for current NECR students?
Absorb it all, accept challenges. If I think in my first semester, one of the things that, the program does a remarkable job of giving, when a student is going through a particular course, the assignments that are drawn from it really help mold you. And so I go back to my first semester and having to put on a presentation, and it was a group presentation. And, it's like not really, because you're still early in the program, so you don't really know the people, though you've been in class with them. And so, it was this opportunity again for us to take some of these skills that we had and sort of put them into place, right? And so it allowed for me to actually challenge myself, right, and challenge my peers. Um, but that just kind of led to me wanting to do more, right? And so it was like taking classes that sort of I had no idea what they were about, like. One of the classes I enjoyed most was my ombudsman class. What it was, but I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. And it was like this very thick, dense course, and it's like, wow, there's this underbelly that of many institutions that does real work, right? And so it was that kind of thing. And I think each of these, like, sort of like, it's like it's like you're playing a game and you move this piece. It makes you more confident to actually be able to take on some of these greater challenges. And so thinking of it from like a consulting perspective, like, you're asked to do something. It's like, well, now that I've actually challenged myself to do so many things, I feel like I may not have, full grasp of what this is, but I know that based on what my knowledge is that I've gained, I can actually get there. And I think for me that's one of those things that's really important too. So I say to students, like, challenge yourself, right? Immerse yourself in the program. Think about it. Think about, for me, it came early in that it was a second semester, but think about the skills that you're acquiring and what you want to do with them. Because I think that in turn can help shape how you go through the program. And something like your capstone can ultimately be something that's indicative of your interest, a true interest, not just like, I have to choose something, so I'm going to choose this, but it can really help you in that way. So I really encourage you to really immerse yourself in the program and make connections with the other students, because for me, that was one of the most fulfilling aspects of the program as well.
Could you tell us a little bit more, for instance, like what, with your job, like what do you do on a daily basis? What are some situations and, yeah.
So so my portfolio here is rather large, right? And so it deals with, so let me tell you what the SOF Heyman is, right? I think that's probably gives you some insight. So we used to be these two separate sort of units, and now we're one. But so we welcome in postdocs, recent PhDs in for up to 3 years. And so they're coming here, they're teaching courses within the core curriculum, some graduate courses. And so one of the things is often onboarding these people, right? These new individuals to what Columbia is, and sort of indoctrinating them. And then we have the Heyman Center, which is another division where well, now they're two, they're one. We have a fair amount of programming that's open to the public. And so what that means is that, there's just a wide range of programming that we do that might touch on any of the various academic units here at the university. So we do a lot of co-sponsorships. And so to that end, what we're doing is a lot of negotiating, right? We're having conversations about how things will go down. If it's something, and so we actually have, um, I would say, in a given semester, say our current situation, our current sort of, we may have like up to 45 events that happen. So how do you logistically pull all of this off, right? What are the things that you need to do? What are the skills that you need to make sure everyone is working with in order to actually be on the same page to do that? And then there's the finance side, which is always fun too. Um, and that just involves handling all of our operating budgets and endowments and things of that sort that we have here at the center.
Great, thanks. And we do have a question from the audience. Did you follow the program part-time or full-time? And can you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Sure. So my first semester it was part-time. So I guess 2 courses would be considered part-time. And it was after that, that sort of dipping my toe into it, like I immersed myself into it. So it was full-time after that, and probably took more courses in some semesters than I should have. But it was like, then, I had at a point tunnel vision, right? I had an idea of what I wanted to do. And so it was easy for me to sort of piece together what my finished product would look like. And I was doing this while working full time, and it's not something I would necessarily recommend for others unless you know that you have the discipline to do it, because there were some semesters where I wondered at the end of the semester how I made it through, working 40 plus hours a week and taking 4 classes a week. I mean, it can be a real challenge in order to do it in that sort of way. But, I had a plan, so it worked out for me. And I don't feel like I sacrificed anything either, because then it became that I was going through with this same cohort. And that too was important to me, because it was like, you started together, you wanted to end together.
Thank you. And so this is a question for me. You've spoken a lot today about the importance of self-awareness, listening, communication, and inclusion. And just thinking about all of those are so important just day to day, but particularly within the past year, after the pandemic has started and the nature of work and how we interact has changed so much. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about if your approaches to those have changed or had to evolve in a certain way, or what your thoughts on that were.
With respect to inclusion, no. Yes and no. So I think that one of the things is that when everything pretty much shut down here in New York in March, it became like necessary for, this, I think there are 7 or 8 of us here at the Society of Fellows in Heyman Center. We no longer had this situation where we were coming into an office daily, being able to pop our heads into someone's office and talk. But the work that we were doing still needed to be done, and that was very important. And so it was figuring out a way that while we were distant, we were still able to actually do those same things or communicate in the same way, or at least lay the groundwork for that. And so, it was one, I think that for many of us, we were looking at like, wow, we're going through a pandemic. And so like, what do you do in a pandemic, right? When life must still go on, but you have this thing hovering sort of in the background. And for us, it just became this thing of knowing that we needed to sort of ramp up our degree of communication. And to that, I think the executive director who's here, who recruited me here, was again receptive to what we wanted to put together. Myself, the other associate director, like, how do we put something together so that we don't really skip a beat? And that meant, increasing the level of communication and, being able to do a lot more forecasting. And then that allowed us to actually, maybe if we stumble, we would have some sort of a fair amount of time to recover, because it was something that was new to us all. Like, it's different if you have 1 or 2 people coming into a new environment, but now everyone pretty much had to go from this environment where we were in person on a daily basis to now, like, we're seeing each other in front of a screen, and it's for this, finite period, and you don't have the same access. So it just meant that we really needed to be far more cognizant in how we were doing things. And I think the other part of that was making ourselves more available, which we continue to do. And that we found that that's been remarkably effective for us.
Thank you. I have another question from our attendees. And you spoke about this a little bit, but I'd love to hear more. When you selected your topic for Capstone, did you choose it because you wanted to work on that topic in your professional post-degree career? In other words, in your professional career, have you worked on the exact Capstone topic, or were you able to find another field /conflict/problem to work on?
So So yes and no, right? So evaluations are important to me in that looking at those two organizations, that was sort of the crux of what I wanted to do. Um, I have not done any work with either sort of research or anything with those two organizations, but it has in fact informed how I've formulated my dissertation proposal, right? And again, it goes to this evaluative process of a very sort of bureaucratic organization, that being the New York City Department of Education. And so my dissertation proposal intends to look at how various primary education schools, so like, chose 3 schools, and looking at how these schools implement and evaluate conflict management systems, right? So that could be peer mediation, it could be restorative justice, or, those versus peace education. And one of the things that, has been consistently consistent is that there's so many different ways that these schools approach it, right? And so that makes it a very difficult sort of thing. But you have this sort of very robust sort of population of kids who are going there. And so for me, it sort of took me back to when I was going through this for the capstone. It's like, well, you have this, in that case, it was these 2 big entities. Now I'm looking at one entity, that is the school system overall, and how, knowing that there are issues of conflict because we see things like suspensions and, expulsions. How do schools put something in place that's going to address those, that's going to ultimately, right, you get all this information, you say, well, what do I do with this information? How do I figure out how I'm going to make this better, right? Or how am I going to modify this somewhere along the way? Not sure if that quite answers the question, but that's sort of why I chose it, and that's how I've sort of evolved from where I was back in 2011.
Great, thank you. And earlier in your talk, you mentioned a peacebuilding class that you took, and I think that was so wonderful to hear, because it sounded like that really helped you think differently, maybe about your approach, or thoughts on communication and what type of implementation you might need to have within an organization or your work. And I think it's interesting too, because typically in the U.S., when we hear peacebuilding, we don't always think about organizations or structures or even doing this work within the United States. So I really, and we could go on a lot of different tangents there, but specifically though, I'd love to hear if you could talk a little bit more about how those ideas about peace building, how those can be implemented within organizations.
Sure. I'll first draw it back to the current research for my dissertation. And for me, it's, going through the program is great, right? Because we learned a lot of skills, right, that teach us how to resolve conflict, if you will. But one of the things and again, the peace building class was fantastic, and I got to look at a real situation that was unfolding in Brooklyn at the time. I looked at peace building as this continuous sort of process, right? So I think conflict resolution as a whole is great, right? Right. So you teach someone, how to come together. Maybe there's an issue between 2 tenants in a building, and you get them together, they mediate, and you say, okay, woo, we're done with that, we can move on. But what happens when you have the next situation that's slightly different, right? So how do you teach skills that are going to, build upon one another, that's going to give you a more robust sort of way of handling things like this in the future? And so I go back to why I chose at the current moment to remain in higher education administration. I think organizations are very important. I think that, if we think about the amount of time that we, pre-pandemic, of course, that we spend in an office or outside of our homes working with other people, we have these multicultural sort of sort of groupings, and we're bound to have differences, right? And that to me, that's actually a good thing. I know on the surface people sort of shy away from conflict, but it's like, if you don't have an understanding of what these things are that are making people uncomfortable, how do you ever then put things into place to actually overcome them or better understand them? And I think for me, that's where I feel like it's really helpful for organizations when they choose to address issues that they have, and look at ways that they can help their employees, coexist, and they have a better understanding of the issues that are confronting them. And again, drawing on this from schools, I think that that's where I really got a lot of information. It's like, well, wow, we have so many of these things that sort of percolate when they're beneath the surface. And if we don't give, we have this great opportunity to actually impart some of these skills on children as a young age, and then they continue to evolve, right? We teach them a certain level of math in first grade, and they learn something more complex in second grade, and so on and so on. I look at this in that same sort of vein, right? We should be able to actually teach these skills so that, not that we'll never have conflict in organizations, because I don't think that that's possible, and I don't think we would want that, because those are not things that will allow us to continue to grow. But how do we figure out how to use those things in a more positive fashion? And I think we have the capacity to do that. And so that's what I'm dedicating my life to.
Well, that makes me so hopeful for the future that there is you and people like you out there. So thank you so much for your thoughts on that, and also just for making that connection earlier. And we do have a question from an attendee. How often do graduates go on to work in government? I will take that on and then parlay that into a question for you, Clarence. But so one of the really interesting strengths of the NECR program is that we have students who are interested in all different professional fields, because these skills can be translated into all areas of both professional and personal life. And so we have had quite a number of alumni go on to work in either different branches of U.S. government, certainly international government as well. But that is one of many areas that students go into, or graduates of the program go into. And I just wanted to connect this, because it's a really good question, but into something you mentioned earlier, Clarence, when you were talking about the just the contacts or the people you got to know from being in the program. And I don't know if that's your cohort or other alumni, but can you talk more about that network and those relationships, and whether or not that
Sure.
impacted your career at all? Or
Sure. I think it's great that our cohort was relatively large, and there were just a myriad of interest, and people went in very different directions. Some people, continued to work in private sector. Some people used it to enhance their position in their the jobs that they were holding at that time. Some have gone off to law school, right? So there's a wide range, and I think that's one of those things that you look at after the fact, and I wish I had that information while I was going through the program, but it worked out okay for me. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's helpful when the program invites graduates back, because you get a sense of people are going through their program and they say, well, what do I do with this degree? And you see wow, there's a wide range of things that you can do with it. You might be able to parlay it into, a segue into a PhD program. You might be able to look at it and sort of cement your desire to go to law school and focus on some particular aspect, or you can take it in a number of other directions. And I think that's one of the beauties of it. And I think with without having looked at the current course offerings, they've always been diverse. And so it has the ability to touch on various fields and industries. So, I think the limits that you have are only the ones that you yourself impose, right? In terms of what you can do with the degree.
I guess a concluding question I have for you. Was there anything that you wanted to share with us that you didn't get the opportunity to, or anything you want to go into a bit more detail on?
Uh, no, I just think like, I'm always happy to talk about like, the utility of something that I think is so simple, right? And I would again be disingenuous if I said I went through this program knowing exactly what I was going to get. I had no idea the impact that it was going to make on my personal life, right? And I think that for me, that was one of those things like, even if I don't do anything with this degree, I'm better off, right? But, and that's a good way to look at it. But the other part of that is that looking at what this has allowed me to do professionally, because it has allowed me to advance. I don't think that, I would have advanced as easily if I didn't have the skill set that I have. And, I think that, I'm always looking for ways to continue that, but I often go back to some of the things that I read while going through the program. I hold on to my books because I think some of those concepts are things that, you know, we may be in a work environment and we have someone like me who's coming in to talk and it's now resonating with us, but you go through that program and you're like, now I'm that person. I'm that person who can informally share some of that information, or I'm someone who can do it in a more formal setting. Like I'm that person who's being asked to come in and give a presentation on multicultural inclusion, or communication, or active listening, or learning to become self-aware. It's a powerful thing to be able to acquire these things and use them for good, right? That's for me one of the things that I found really helpful. And again, I it's different if I had gone through a statistics program and learned how to do various things, but here I feel like this really does have value. It really does have utility. And I feel like overall, like, I'm a better person for it. And I'm sure that there are other programs that might do this in other ways, but I think of how wide ranging this is. And I think that's one of the things that has made it so fulfilling to me.
Well, thank you so much for your generosity of time and spirit, sharing all of this great advice and reflection with us today. So, thank you again to Clarence Coaxum for joining us, and thank you to SPS Events for hosting us, and thank you to all of our attendees today. Again, this recording will be posted soon on the NECR web page as well as our YouTube channel, so feel free to come back to it for reference or share it with others who might be interested as well. We do this monthly series as a way to showcase all of the different careers and career trajectories that our alumni have, because it is very wide ranging, and this just gives us an opportunity to ask some specific questions. So thank you again. Take care and be safe and have a good rest of your week.